world is sort of a power law, right? Of whether it's music listening, some people listen a little, and then some people listen extremely much. Everything is a power law. But I think what is interesting, what Spotify's gained from, if you look at playlisting, for example, some people playlist a lot. Most people have one playlist. Maybe they're liked songs, maybe two playlists, you know, an indie favorite. Some people have like hundreds of playlists. So sort of the story of Spotify and what we got good at personalization and recommendation in the first place was that we had like, I don't know, 10 billion user playlists, which is people carefully saying this track goes well with this track, goes well with this track. It's an incredibly valuable data set. But to your point, it was heavily skewed. It was a few use, not a few millions, but not hundreds of millions, that did a lot of work that benefited the others. Those people saying these tracks go well together meant that the others who weren't that into music, they didn't keep up with the new releases of the back catalog, they got amazing recommendations from the work of these people. And so I think that's going to be true here as well. And in fact, I know it is true. We see some people engaging a lot, talking to Spotify all the time, saying that, no, that's wrong, that's bad, it should be like this. They're doing a lot of work, they're making their Spotify better for themselves. But then we know that someone else who looks very similar to that, but doesn't have the time or knowledge to do all of that, actually probably want the same thing.
And they can benefit from the other.
So they benefit from the others.
The analogy I had, because everybody's like, oh, you know, everybody's going to be building everything they want. I was like, I don't think they're going to build it all. Tell me if this is a stupid analogy. I'm curious your personal opinion on this. But like, if you even look at like, how easy is it to post to social media? You put a picture, or like 2 buttons, and you're done.
Incredibly.
And it's something like, you know, 90% comes from 1%, and then you have the next 10% do others, and then like 85 or 90% just lurk. They do nothing. But I feel like that's a good representation of humanity, where like 90% is not going to build anything.
There's this famous 1-9-90, right? 1% creates, 9% curates, and 90% consumes.
Okay.
Right? Something like that. And I think that's largely true. That's what I mean with the power law. But as I said, that 1% that creates and that 9% that curates, they can be incredibly valuable for the other 90% that consumes.
And then allows you to do it for them, which I think is what most humans want.
Deal is how the best founders turn the world into their talent pool. I've been studying how history's greatest founders operate for a decade, and one thing they all have in common is they understand that recruiting and hiring the very best talent is your most important priority. A players recognize other A players, which is why top companies like Ramp, Shopify, 11 Labs, Uber, and DoorDash all use Deal. Many of the top founders I know have personally invested in Deal after using their product. And what they discovered is that Deal is the best company in the world at building infrastructure for global hiring. Deal will help your business hire, pay, and manage any worker anywhere in the world, so you can retain the best talent anywhere and spend the rest of your time focusing on what you do best, delivering value to your customers. The founder of 11 Labs has a great description of the value Deal can give your company. He said, "We built 11 Labs to break down language and communication barriers. With Deal enabling us to hire and support exceptional talent anywhere, we can accelerate our innovation and bring more voices, stories, and ideas to every corner of the world." Deal is trusted by over 40,000 businesses. Learn how they can help your business today by going to deal.com/Senra. That is deal.com/Senra.
There's some context I think people need here. So the fourth most listened to on my Spotify Wrap for podcast was Spotify A Product Story, which you narrate. That came out in 2021, 23?
Yeah, something like that. Over a couple of years. Came out there.
Long time ago. And it tells the history, which I think more company, I talk to founders about this all the time, because like, you essentially like, why don't we just tell our own company history, and then you interview the people that were there at the time, like Sean Parker's in there, Daniel X there, people that played a role, even if they only played a role for a few years.
Yeah.
But the crazy thing is you have entire episodes, I think from 2021 or 2022, dedicated to how you're using AI in Spotify, way before, you know, people have been talking about AI for 60 years, but even back then, way less people are talking about it now. Tell me the difference of how you view AI back then in 2021, 2022 to Spotify to today.
Yeah, so my interest in AI, I think as many, you know, I was always interested in growing up, and then became an engineer and so on in university, which was like in the late 90s. I was interested in it. There were no networks back then, but you couldn't do anything. Computers were not powerful enough. And then I went into what was called IT, right? And I did my own companies, and I started Spotify. And then when I came to Spotify, we already had one of these large data sets of music playlists. And so there were some very talented people there, specifically a guy named Erik Bernhardsson, who at the time, this is 2009, was doing machine learning. Something called collaborative filtering on what was the world's largest Hadoop clusters. And I'm like, this is super cool. Like this scale of data and these algorithms, I hadn't been thinking about it for a long time. So I got very inspired by that, kind of got back into it. And then what happened was DeepMind started doing these reinforcement learning based things. They had this thing called the DeepQ network that started beating Atari games, if you remember that. And it looked like a toy back then, like everything does. But I was so pilled already on like the idea of how do we actually work as humans from a philosophical point of view. I didn't have a good answer, no one did. But I had this idea that maybe it is computational, because it was the model of the artificial neuron. But it was hard to believe in the 90s with these like DeepQ networks from Demis Hassabis and David Silver and the whole DeepMind team. You could see the scaling of like it's handling more and more complex problems. So I got very deep into that. I went home and I started coding again, and I did my own sort of recurrent neural networks and LSTM and GRUs and stuff, just for fun, during my vacations and evenings and nights. And we kept doing our recommendations problem, which was sort of old school AI, which was called ML, machine learning. But then when the what is called the Transformer paper came out in, I think, June of 2017, it's a paper called Attention is All You Need. I think I read it like in the first few days, and I was completely blown away by it, and I started talking to anyone who wanted to listen. So I was just primed for that and happening. So then we started investing quite aggressively towards this. I think, if you extrapolate it out, if you really believe in that exponential curve, which I've tested a few times, then eventually, computers would be able to start talking to you and reason, and you would be able to talk to computers. We started preparing for that quite early. We bought this company called Sonantic to be able to produce voice. I mean, you can buy voice anywhere on the internet today, but it's quite expensive per minute. So if you want to serve 700 million users with like a few minutes of voice per day, you're going to go bankrupt. So we bought this company producing voice very, very cheaply with a different technology, even before the LLMs were smart enough to produce the script for that voice. Because we just bet on, intercepting that curve instead of waiting for it and then building for it. So I think it comes from a personal interest in AI and then a bit of luck being at a place like Spotify that had access to lots of data. And then when you see it, just, have to bet on it. And I think the interest is a personal interest. Spotify is sort of an excuse to get as close as possible to the philosophical side of AI, sort of what it means to be a human.
Say more about that.
Well, I think, you go through life, and I was thinking a lot as a kid about things, and there were a few problems that really like dumbfounded me when I learned about them. One was this notion, I don't remember exactly when, but someone told me, all the atoms in your body, or like 99% of them, get switched out every 7 years. And I'm like, yeah, wait, what? Every 7 years? What do you mean? So yeah, every 7 years they're all switched out. But that means I'm not the same person. So if I thought I was my atoms, I thought it was my body, but clearly this is me, and you're telling me I see you in 7 years, and I'm someone else? So then what am I? If I'm not my atoms, what am I? If you look at a rock, it is its atoms. You look at it, you come back 7 years later, same atoms. But in you and I, like your atoms may have been, first of all, most atoms never get destroyed or created, right? They're largely the same. So you may have a bunch of Napoleon atoms in your body or something, and when you die, it's going to go to someone else, right? So it's just the construction of those atoms that is you for like a very brief time, right? So I got to that realization that, you're not your atoms, you're the structure of your atoms. And another word for structure is information. So then I'm like, okay, so it's a DNA. Like DNA is the blueprint, and like you arrange the atoms in a certain thing, that's you. And then someone said, like, no, that's not really it either, because if you think about something for a long time, if you play the piano for a long time, if you think certain patterns, your brain will grow. You're going to get an overdeveloped musical center. If you're good at languages, your language center develops. Or the most famous example are cabbies in the UK. They have to learn all the London by heart. And when you brain scan them, they have a very overdeveloped 3D center for three-dimensional thinking. So clearly, it's not static. What you think about moves those atoms around in new patterns, and it's not even the same atoms. The atoms get switched out over time. So now you're not your atoms, you're not even the structure of the atoms, You literally are your thoughts. Literally, not as an analogy. It's the only thing that is constant is the processing information pattern, right? Everything, like the atoms that do the processing get switched out. So now I'm like, okay, shit, I'm information processing. And that was kind of a mindfuck. And then I got comfortable with it because I'm like, well, now I can sort of live forever. Because if I'm information processing, I'm thinking in certain ways. That's really what I am. You could have instantiated me with some other atoms, etc. Then if I bring some of that into my kids, if they're thinking a little bit in the same way, like 32% of me is still living in them. Because I am my thoughts, and then I transfer my thoughts. And if you Ray Kurzweil, you say like, well, now transfer them to computer, and you get to live forever because you are your thoughts. And if that information processing lives there, that was really you. You were not your atoms. So this whole thing of like, we probably are computational beings, information processing. I think is what got me into AI in the first place. But then at university,
almost 2 decades ago.
More than that, in university in the late 90s, you couldn't do anything with it. The computers were not powerful enough. So when you try to instantiate those ideas, you built a neural network with like a few nodes and it slowed their crawl and it was unimpressive. And you're like, nah, that can't be it.
Okay, so this is interesting. So you've been thinking about this for multiple decades. You had to have this like favorable occurrence of events that now lead you to have. I think you guys are the second largest subscriber base in the world behind Netflix. Am I correct?
Yes.
And you have this huge data set. Now the technology can catch up with the thing you've been thinking about since you're in college.
Yeah, it's a good excuse to get to spend all my day thinking about, learning about these things, working with the best people in the business. I have the fortune of meeting all of these people that are changing the world. I get to meet them and talk to them and ask my interesting, stupid questions about, things. So it's just a fortunate position to be in, to get to do something that you're passionate about. But I feel very lucky because I can do that, but I can do it in an area where I think it's still good for the world. And I can have impact I can steer this towards what I think is a good outcome of AI. Like giving back user control, for example.
I don't want to skip over that because I truly believe we've had enough private conversations, and I know you talk to all the other like people designing products with all the big companies. We talked about this privately in the past, and it's just like, yet some of them, have made decisions where they know they have optimized. They're like, hey, we ran this test. This is great for engagement. It's terrible for the mental health, and they're like, push it. That's insane to me. But it's insane. This is what we were talking about before we started recording. Was like, I told you, it's like it sounds silly, but like, I deeply desire a world in which Steve Jobs is still alive because I obviously love technology, but I want the people building the technology that we all use on the scale that we all use it at to like build tools, and that's all technology is, that enhance humanity instead of trying to replace it or to make you dumber or fatter or just sucked into your phone and depressed, which I feel is a lot of what's going on now.
Yeah.
Which is, I think what you said earlier was like, well, podcasts, we have this thing growing massively that's good for the world, assuming you're listening to the right podcast. You should be listening to David Senra and Founders, of course. At the same time, when these people are like destroying their brains in 15, 20 second, 5 second, 1 second scrolling. And it reminded me when you said that earlier, I was like, oh, that you go back and read Jeff Bezos' shareholder letters. He talks about why he invented the Kindle. He said the Kindle was an antidote to short attention spans. He was worried that people weren't going to read anymore.
I'm deeply impressed by the Kindle, by the way, as a product. And it's not just the technology, like the passive screens and so forth. What people miss is the business model innovation they did. The Whisper Sync. Just updates in the background because it's a certain amount of mobile data. It's a great product.
Explain the business model innovation on the Kindle.
Well, normally you would have to pay for data. So if you would have been lazy, which they weren't, you would have said like, here's a Kindle, now go and buy a mobile subscription monthly for that. For the books to update. And what they did was they signed deals with these carriers. They calculated the average book size and they made a fixed cost deal where all the data sort of forever was included in the price of the hardware. You bought this thing for a one-time cost and it just magically updates. At the time, that was magic. There was good business model innovation on top of all the product innovation, which is something I'm very passionate about. I believe that technology is necessary ingredient for change, but not sufficient. I think you can cause havoc with technology, like piracy. But when things really change is when you take a new technology and marry it with a new, often contrarian business model. This is the Spotify story of access versus ownership, for example. which is, by the way, why I would also love Steve Jobs to be around, but also not, because, you know, he tried to kill us many times.
It's funny, we had this conversation, so we had Jimmy Iovine on the show earlier, and, you know, Jimmy was in, like, top 3 people I wanted to meet of all time, because I love Defiant Ones, the documentary of him and Dr. Dre.
Yeah.
And I've watched it, I don't know, now 10 times or something, and it's weird because me and Jimmy are friends, and we're, like, we live close to each other, and he swears up and down, he's like, I was gonna kill him. He's just like, Apple held me back. I was like, Jimmy, there's just no way. He's like, you're like a small part in a huge company that built the most successful consumer product of all time. These were small guys in a tiny, there's like 5 million people in Sweden, something like that. And they had, if Spotify, like, they only had one thing. They had, I always love this idea. It was like, if you had to pick between, this is Josh Kushner's quote, where it's like, if you had to pick the person that's like, the most experienced or the smartest or wants it the most, you always bet on the person that wants it the most. They had to, if they didn't succeed, they would have died. If Apple Music didn't work out, they would have been fine. And I think he said when he started the fight with you guys only had like, I don't know, 3 million or 10 million or 15 million subscribers. And then you just smoked them.
A lot of people were very, very scared at the time.
Because he was a legend, and he still is. And he's a killer. I mean, dude, to this day, even though he's retired, I mean, me and Daniel talk about this all the time because it's just hilarious because they're obviously close friends too, and yeah, he's a formidable individual. But again, I think being onto a bigger company, and again, like it was just very fascinating.
But imagine that you're a fairly small Swedish startup, and you think you're good at product, and then the biggest, most respected product company in the world, and the person you look up to the most, Steve Jobs, says that he's coming after you. But not only that, goes and buys Beats Music, brings in Dr. Dre and Jimmy Iovine. It's like, we're gonna kill you. That's what they literally said in their internal meetings. They gave us 6 months. It was, those were hard times.
Yeah.
We worked very hard. But it worked out. There have been a few of those moments.
There's a great line though about this because if you think about Jimmy's experience in the music industry, it's just fascinating. They tell the story in the obviously documentary. You know, starting out sweeping the floor in the record in the record plant. And then, you know, becoming an engineer and then a producer and then one of the most successful creators of a new record company and then building products. Like, the reason I recommend, you know, people studying his stories, because, like, the people that can succeed in so many different domains over multiple decades, that's not luck. There's something going on that they
100%.
know.
Yeah, you don't get that lucky that many times.
Yeah.
For sure.
So it had to be terrifying from your end. But the one thing I think of, this great maxim from Game of Thrones, which I'm obsessed with, and it says, those on the margins often come to control the center.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, it couldn't have been more marginal than these group of Swedish guys in this tiny country trying to take over and build the company you guys built.
There were some good, hard reasons for why we didn't get crushed then.
What do you think they were?
Well, I think the content side of the business was incredibly worried because if it was only about content and, you know, only about musicians, you had, you know, hip hop, which is the you know, has the largest appeal in the US and all these powerful people. But there were some structural reasons. One is, when we created our strategy, we bet on 3 things, and they were all basically counter positions to Apple deliberately. One was freemium. We believe that Apple would, if they even did a free product, they would struggle to do advertising. They tried the iAd, but they wanted so much control, it didn't work. So we bet that they wouldn't do a good free tier, and so we focused a lot on freemium and a really good free tier. The second was personalization, because Apple was, I would almost say, against data at the time. We bet that they would never get good at personalization recommendation, and we believe that was the future. The third was ubiquity. We bet that they were gonna prefer their own products, never be good on a Samsung TV or an Android phone. So these were our 3 bets: premium, personalization, and ubiquity. And I have to say they panned out really well. They're still struggling on. They had a free tier for a while, the radio. They pulled it back. Ubiquity, you know, I think they still struggle to be good on non-Apple hardware. And personalization, I want to say, we're better. So there were real strategic reasons, and still are, for why I think we held out. But it was also, to your point, for us this was not optional. We either died or we did this.
They're back against the wall. What do you
Well, I
think?
think to your point, I don't know what price of Apple Music was at the time, but it was not more important than the iPhone, for sure.
I found one of my all-time favorite quotes when I was reading the book 0 to 1. The quote says, "The single most powerful pattern I have noticed is that successful people find value in unexpected places, and they do this by thinking about business from first principles instead of formulas." That is exactly what AppLovin has done with their advertising platform, Axon. Axon connects you with over 1 billion potential new customers inside mobile games. Axon allows you to capture undivided attention. Axon ads are full-screen video ads that are watched for an average of 35 seconds. That is retention that blows other ad platforms out of the water. You can launch on Axon in minutes. You set the goal, and Axon achieves it. There's no complex setup, no expertise needed, and Axon scales quickly. They can put your ads in front of over 1 billion potential customers. Other businesses have seen immediate results, have scaled to hundreds of thousands of dollars of spend per day, and increased their revenue by millions. So you want to get started quickly before all your competitors are on Axon. And you can do that by going to axon.ai/Senra. That is axon.ai/Senra.
Everybody's gonna know what Spotify is. I don't think many people know who you are. You've only done a few podcasts. The one you did with Patrick I thought was excellent. But I want to go into some of the things that I know about you that I think is very unusual. We talked about like kind of the dangers of some of these social apps, and you have built your own AI agent. Can you explain how you like consume X, for example, what you've built?
So this is something we're working on at Spotify, and we released this just a few weeks ago. It's something called Save to Spotify. When you sit in your code or Codex or something, you can just you can ask these agents to go out and look at information for you, write your podcast script, and then generate a podcast, and then we allow you to upload that to Spotify, but privately, right? Because you may put private information in there. Maybe you want to prep for your interview, as I did today. I don't want that to be all over Spotify. So we now support private podcasts or personal podcasts. And so what I do is I use these agents, and I take a combination of my personal information, so documents I have and things I want to prep for, and then what I'm interested in based across my different services, all my interests. Spotify knows my interests pretty well from all my listening. It goes out and looks at what's happening in the world, and then it gives me this update that is deeply personal about what's happening in the world that I might be interested in. So it's kind of like a personal algorithm that filters out a lot of the noise and the crazy that I don't want to hear, and just gives me the stuff that I want to hear. This is the kind of user control that I would like to give every user, but it's the kind of user control that you can have now if you're prepared to put in the work. And what's interesting is I didn't expect this, but I found so much music and podcasts through this. Then it's filtered to the people that I'm interested in, that I follow on different social media and so forth. So it's the thing that is being talked about among the people I care about. So for example, your episode with Evan Spiegel came up again and again, with lots of commentary in my personal podcast saying like, this is really interesting. You should listen to this, because there are product wisdoms in there and so forth. So I listened to the whole episode, which I really like, by the way. I'm thinking about stealing his framing of like, we used to have all the ideas but limited resources. Now we have all the ideas and all the resources. I really like that.
The thing about Evan, people give me shit. They're like, yeah, but look at his market cap. I was like, I don't care about his market cap. I care about that you think he is truly differentiated.
He is
and I spent a bunch of time with him. At the end, I was like, I just want him to win. I don't care what it's like. We can figure it out. And then everybody's like, oh, but his market, his it stock's down 80% or something like that. So I just went to ChatGPT, and I was like, how many times did Steve Jobs suffer a 75% decline? It was like 4 times. Like, this happens in everybody's career. The kid is young. He's not a kid. The guy is young. Like, let's see what happens over the next decade.
Yeah.
But the fact is, like, he's got a lot of very, very interesting ideas that no one else has. And he invented a pattern on social media that 1 billion people use every day.
He invented several of them,
yes.
right? The disappearing image, stories, like all of
Do
these
you think
things.
that guy's not interesting to hear talk for an hour? You're fucking crazy.
Of course. No, I like him. Maybe it's because I'm a product guy, the design guy's close, but I like him, sure.
This is one of the most fascinating things about you, and I think it's really, really important to drill down on, and it's really dangerous for people not to do. You are constantly trying to eliminate noise. The idea, even before you turn this into an audio, you're essentially taking text and turning it into audio now with the feature you just talked about. But when we talked about this, or maybe I heard you, I think you told me about it, or maybe I heard you talk about it on a podcast, when you were taking it, you could read it though, before, right? It was like stripping out all like the crazy shit that happens on X, or the people fighting over politics, and it's just like that. What are the people I care about? what are they talking
Exactly.
about?
So-
It's not going to induce me, like, it's not going to raise my cortisol levels or make me sad.
So I literally ask my agent, filter for rage bait, filter for clickbait, filter for politics. I just ask. This is the kind of user control that you can have now. That very few people understand that you can have yet, and it's too complicated. But you can have all that control. So what I think is, most people kind of know what they want, but you get captured in the moment. It's like you want something, and then someone puts candy in front of you. You're going to take that candy. So what is interesting is, can you give people the chance to decide their own future ahead of time? This is the idea behind like the taste profile and behind these agents. Like, I'm not better than anyone else. I get captured all the time. So my specific pet peeve is road rage. I'm so fascinated by it. I just go down dark holes of road rage because it's the weirdest thing. Like these supposedly fully normal smart people, they waste their entire life and go to jail.
They shoot into cars and kill kids.
Yes,
like,
and then
disgusting.
afterwards you realize that no, they were pretty normal people. It's just somehow inside your car you lose it. So I go down that rabbit hole and I watch hours of road rage, right? But what I can do now is I can say like, don't show me road rage because I know what's gonna happen. So that like what do you call it? Ahead of time, premeditated.
Yeah, pretty much.
Like premeditated media
Yeah.
is something that I think everyone should at least have access to if they want to. It works for me, and I think it will work for a lot of people. And I think that need is not going to get less. I think it's not going to get smaller. It's going to get bigger. So I happen to think it's also good business.
Something that just popped to mind when you were speaking just now. I'm very curious, like, who influenced, so we're talking about, like, essentially your information diet, right? And what you're letting into your mind. You talked about earlier, we literally are our thoughts. Like, you're crazy to, like, let people get into your brain and affect you. And I was talking to Mr. Beast about this yesterday, where he's just like, I don't think people should have Instagram, because it's just like, it's just making all these young kids, like, comparison is the thief of joy, and all they're doing all day long is comparing, somebody else's highlight reel to them, and it's just, like, very, very bad for you to let that into your brain. One of my favorite things, I think Daniel said it on this podcast last year, where, I'm always curious when I get to meet people, especially insanely successful people. It's like, who tells you the truth is a question I was asked, because it's like very few. A lot of them kind of have like this almost like cloud of sycophants around them. They're like filtering their knowledge that's getting into them. And what they'll do is like, they'll seek out people they can trust and that'll tell them the truth. And I think he told the story of you being one of those people for him, for Daniel, because you pulled him aside and you're like, hey, you're running product and you're like not good at it. You're kind of fucking this up. And his response was, he went home, I think he told his wife, he's like, oh my God, I have to fire this guy. It was you. And then he thought about it, he goes, oh, he's right. It's like, he just did me a service.
Very few people are that strong, can take that kind of thing, but that's why he's successful.
Yes.
Right.
And so I think this is really important. So who does that for you?
So I do a version of the same thing. This is back to the thing of long tenure. So I have people who are long tenured, I have like huge disagreements with them, and they've realized that when they talk back to me, they get upset with me, there are no consequences, right? But that comfort takes a long while to build. You can't expect someone to come in, especially if they come from corporate America, and expect them to like stand up to you, because usually there are consequences. You just get fired. So I've built,
Oh yeah, but people don't know you're a brown belt.
No. I'm a blue belt.
Blue belt in jiu-jitsu, so you could also choke them.
There are many people who could choke me out, so that's a risky path to take.
Okay.
It's the tenure. I have a bunch of people around me who, well, I think and hope feel comfortable saying like, no, you're wrong. I think you're just not understanding this. And I think so because they do. And they've learned that, I can't always control myself. I'm very passionate about something. I'm like, no, you're wrong. That's stupid, blah, blah, blah. And then they know it's not going to be consequences. So they say it anyway. I try to do that more in like one-on-ones or small groups. Sometimes there's a big meeting. Someone who has worked with me for a long time feels very, very.
啊，你回来了，
回来了，买那这两件给你，把上面乱
又买一回，为什么每次回来都买一回？
这是一般的你帮你看一下
Shit.
是什么东西
Not everyone is
？T 恤
T 恤
You，know, so you have to build that.
那上面乱七八糟
I
扔掉
have。a version of the same.
Okay, so we talked about
看过
at the
去
very
很
beginning
旧
of this
的，不
conversation
要
where I
扔
never
掉。
finished.
不要扔掉，放在后
I
面
was。asking Mr. Beast about
不要扔掉
his
这个
talent,
好看，
like
你
the
喜欢
还可以
的，
还可以
你不要，
And
你
he's
是
like,
不要
there's
字
a
的。
value here because the guy that runs his operations has been there. They used to live together. He's like, I've spent not 10,000 hours talking to this guy, 30,000 hours, where Dave walks on set, and since he's running his operations, they're running like 10 at a time. Mr. Beast can walk on set and
西瓜给你
like he'll look up and the guy, his name's Tyler, he's like, I already know about this and this is why I made this decision and we're doing this and oh, you may not like this shot, but we're doing this shot because it allows us to shoot from this angle.
今天天
And
气也
then
不热，
literally just nothing has to even come out. It's like they're
Yeah.
what's that from thing Star Trek with the Vulcan mind meld? I
Yeah,
think it was.
exactly.
See, that's what happens. He goes and he said the greatest thing. He goes, you don't get that in 100 hours.
So one benefit of tenure is the trust. People keep
小
you
鸟是
honest.
上班久不久？
Unless you become too full of
我
yourself.
不知道
There's always a，
可能
risk
几
of
个小时。
But the other benefit is this efficiency of like people know you don't have to give as much context. There are some downsides to tenure, which is opposite of Elon's. You don't get fresh blood as much, and so you need to be careful. Maybe you're just a group of old people that are.
那种远低速度矮，但是现在已经有能源了。那个鸟，你有没有看见？绿色的鸟叫低速度矮。
People have to be very, very careful with. Think about like the most talented people that Walt Disney had. It was like these 9 guys, these animators. I think they used to call them the old men after Walt died. And I just talked to Ed Catmull, the founder of Pixar, and they're going in there as he's a young technologist trying to pitch them. Here's a new way to animate. And Walt's dead. These guys are old. There's no fresh blood. They're like, the computers will never be able to do the stuff that you're talking about. It's like they reject. It's very in human nature to reject these new ideas.
So it's back to like you optimize for some things, but then you have to mitigate for the other things. So if you're optimized for tenure, you have to mitigate for the risk that you don't get fresh blood, that your career ladder is slow. So maybe people who are talented feel like, well, that's going to take 10 years to get up the career ladder. So then you have to create programs for that to give them exposure.
It took Gustav 18 years to get to CEO.
Took 18 years to get to it. Wow, it's a long time. Finally made it. But it is the same principle.
Well, how do you get new talent then? Like, what are you guys doing literally at Spotify? Because I know you have the same idea. You guys have the same idea that Toby from Shopify talked to me about, and my friend Kareem from Ramp.
Yeah, it was
it's
another
like-
great episode, by the way. The Toby episode.
Yeah, he's
Yeah.
the best. But that you guys are fine hiring for spikes.
Yeah.
So how do you, like today, how are you getting in your huge platform, business around, I think just celebrated 20-year anniversary,
Yes,
right?
exactly.
Yeah. How are you getting new young talent then? How do you
So
get about
这
that?
是什么东
it's a
西？
couple of things. One is
给你吃。
you get
我也不知道。
junior talent, and
比
then
以前
we
的
have
直接，
this-
现在这
this,
3万多。
Rising Stars program. We literally ask managers to identify like these are rising stars. So then we have a program for them every year. It's like maybe 20, 30 people. And so they get to go on this program where they go out into the different markets like India, US, Germany, etc. and learn about the different problems in the different markets. Then they go and sit with Alex and talk to him, and they sit with me. It's literally this internal, MBA program where you learn business, technology, product, and you build relationships across the org. Right, so now, if people come out 12 months later, they know everyone in Spotify across the world, so they can get anything done. So now they're going to start rising much faster. So we have these specific programs to identify the talent and help them accelerate versus like the organic path of them doing something, getting noticed, and slowly working their way up. So that's one thing. But then every now and then, you also just have to hire at a more senior level, right? So if you look at when AI started happening, or what was called machine learning back then, I felt that we just weren't strong enough in deep learning specifically. We knew the old school matrix factorization stuff. So we did an acquisition of a company called the Econest in Boston just to get very close to MIT. And then we got a bunch of talent in that field and establish ourselves. So sometimes you have to do acquisitions and just get, when it's a completely new skill, something like, if you need to get big in crypto quickly, yeah, you can wait for years for the organization to understand crypto and learn. You may have to acquire or hire at some senior level. You have to mitigate for the problems of tenure. And if I'm going to make some far-fetched analogies, maybe this is one of the challenges that Apple had with machine learning and AI.
So
On
Siri
average,
so bad.
they were slightly too old to see that. Probably people in their org knew all about it. We're all over it. It was too late to see it. They should have just gotten someone at a more senior level sooner. So sometimes you have to mitigate for the drawbacks of long tenure as well.
What's the thing that keeps you up at night? Like, what do you think the weakest spot for Spotify is right now?
I think the thing that keeps me up at night is not surprising what AI truly means in the limit. I'm pretty sure that media habits are going to change because of AI. And so I don't think it's an option to just sit still But the way I think about it is the world moves in macro waves. You get some new technology, it often causes a bunch of havoc, then there's some new business model that emerges, and then things change. Right? This was the original Spotify. We kind of rode on the macro wave of cheap broadband and PCs, right? And then all of a sudden they were so ubiquitous and the broadband was so fast you didn't actually need to own files anymore. You could just stream them, right? We realized that, but the business model around it became very disruptive to the download industry and so forth. And then you wait a few years, everything looked great. Then the smartphone came along, and now everything changes again. You have people that don't have a computer. We only had a free tier on the computers. We had no free tier. Turns out that while the PC and the internet on the desktop had such low latency that you could stream it, if you try to stream a song over cellular back in 2008, it wouldn't even start. It would 20 seconds to start. It would chop. So like everything changed again. And then we had to adapt to that. And we managed to. We came up with the offline sync business model and mobile model and so forth. But then you get these periods of stability. So if I was an analyst and I try to predict the world between 2015 to 2025, those 10 years, you stick, what would the world be like? I would have done really well to just extrapolate. More mobile, more subscription, more ads, just more of everything. And you would have gotten really close to what happened. But if you would have shifted that 10 years earlier, 2005 to 2015, you would have extrapolated PCs and internet. You would have missed smartphones. You would have missed everything. You would have missed Uber. You would have missed the entire world. So the question is, which era are we in? Are we in the calm waters of extrapolation or in the macro change? I think we're in one of these where everything changes. So I can't tell you what's going to change, but I'm pretty sure that things are going to change. But the way we think of it as a company is the scariest periods are the periods of change. Guess when Spotify grew the most?
Periods of change.
Periods of change. When things are stable, market share stays stable. You don't need market share. So when there's change, there's risk you can lose market share. But that is also when you have the most opportunity to eat market share. If you adopt the change. So my principle is just always be first. Be first and adopt it first. Like the world is going to change, just accept that and get ahead of the curve. So I think this is a time of great opportunity for us to do new things, but it is also the thing I'm thinking about constantly. What does it actually mean, and what are the right bets? Are the right bets to bet on user control and these things are, whereas others are going to bet complete opposite of us. So that's what keeps me up at night is we're still in this change. It hasn't finished yet. No one knows exactly where it's going to end up. They're going to be the Ubers and Airbnbs of this era. And maybe they are open and Anthropic, but maybe not. Maybe it hasn't even happened yet.
That's a perfect place to end. Gustav, thanks for doing this, man. Always good to talk to you.
Thank you, man.
Appreciate it, man. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please remember to subscribe wherever you're listening and leave a review. And make sure you listen to my other podcast, Founders. For almost a decade, I've obsessively read over 400 biographies of history's greatest entrepreneurs, searching for ideas that you can use in your work. Most of the guests you hear on this show first found me through Founders.
And so if you charge a similar amount as a startup, and it sort of resembles the way the other vendors charge, the customer will be like, oh, that makes sense. It'll fit right in.
Yeah.
Versus when you're a founder and you try to price it in a totally weird way. It'd be like if you were like a hotel and you're like, oh, you pay with seashells, and like, we don't take money here.
This is Dalton plus Michael. Today we're going to talk about how do startups get big deals? 6-figure deals, 7-figure deals, 8-figure deals. How do they get big deals? And the kind of subtitle here is, are you selling tools or are you selling hours?
I think a very common first office hour topic for companies that get accepted into YC is some version of them saying, Dalton, how do I get big deal? It's like they haven't even Googled it, right? This is just like and I think the context is that most people understand self-service because they've signed up. Like, who hasn't signed up for GitHub or signed up for Figma or, we're all used to signing up for SaaS, putting in our credit card and paying for stuff. And so I don't think you need that much direction as a founder on how to create
How to charge $10 a month.
Yeah, like, okay, you go set up a Stripe account and then, it's pretty straightforward. But most people have not purchased 6 or 7 figure software.
No.
Some of them have.
No,
Most people haven't.
Yes.
And so it's a complete black box, right?
It's also, I think, scary as a result. I've never seen it happen. I mean, I know it actually happens, but I've never seen it. So am I going to go do it?
Yep.
Can I do it? And I think that this is what's tricky because, you know, if we get to the TLDR, how many massively successful software companies never have to figure this out? I think almost everyone. And it's funny because even if you're a consumer company, right? Like Facebook has 8-figure advertising deals. Like, you know, it's like it is really, really, really hard to make billions and billions of dollars, $10 at a time. It is very, very hard. And so I often think that one of the biggest challenges founders have is when they're transitioning from the $10 a month self-sign up to how do we figure out how to sell big deals?
Usually the way I try to set this up for people that are just like ice cold on the topic around pricing or deal size is I ask them to think about how they purchase most products, which is to look at like 3 to 5 options. Say stuff on a grocery shelf. Or say you're looking at hotel rooms. Like, oh, I need to go to New York. I need a hotel. So you like go to the site and there'll be like, you know, 3 or 5 options. They have different prices. They have different features, but you're sort of choosing between those small number of options, and they're all, you know, relatively simple. This is how most people buy expensive software, is that they're like, cool, I know how much this vendor costs, and this vendor costs, and this vendor costs. And so if you charge a similar amount as a startup, and it sort of resembles the way the other vendors charge, the customer will be like, oh, that makes sense. Cool, it's $200K a year. Oh, it'll fit right in.
Yeah.
Versus when you're a founder and you try to price it in a totally weird way. I feel like if you were like a hotel and you're like, oh, you pay with seashells, you know, and like we don't take money here.
You take a bath, it costs this much. If you're gonna sleep on this half of the bed,
Like you're not gonna make a sell, okay? Like because you didn't take the time to understand how the customer is purchasing all this other software.
even if those things represent your costs, right? So you can have this fake first principles of, well, I'll just charge as a function of my costs. Let me transparently show my costs off. And what do you
Makes no sense. And so I can't stress this enough. Understand how other vendors that your potential customer pay for or would evaluate. Understand how they position and price and sell and just be like that.
Yeah.
Just make it so if they look at you side by side with the other vendors, you don't break their brains.
Yes. Well, and that's often how you get to make a big contract being a 20-person company going up against a 1,000-person company, because it's like the customer's buying the same thing and you're priced the way that and you can deliver the service. Go. You get to make more money. I think another thing that happens that I find frustrating as a business guy, I will put my business guy. I think developers like to sell developers. And I think developers like to build tools, sell those
两个鸟
tools,
火鸟跟那个
like
绿色
that is the
鸟
easiest construction of the world.
笑死了
It's constructed that way. I think that corporate CEOs need to deliver revenue. So I think there's like a massive disconnect, right? The CEO is incentivized by their stock compensation to deliver revenue and increase the stock price of the company. The developer wants to deliver tools and give those tools to the developer. How do those tools translate into more revenue for the company? And I think there's 2 philosophies. Philosophy 1 is that's the company's problem. Good luck. And philosophy 2 is that's the vendor's problem. I need to help. I think that when you're philosophy 2, you get to charge a lot of money.
Yep.
I've heard some incredible stories about Palantir. We have so many founders who used to be like Palantir engineers, and like the economics of some of these deals, it's like we send 10 guys in to fix your thing and you pay us $1 billion over 4 years because fixing that thing made you $10 billion, and nobody cares how many guys it took. Like, I don't care. If I get to make 10 billion, I'm happy to pay you 1. But if you're like, here's a tool, go figure it out, and the engineers at that company can't figure it out, so that company loses value, you can't ask for a lot of money. So this makes sense to you. Why is this so confusing?
I think that the engineer mindset is to care how something works under the hood.
Yes.
And the non-engineer mindset is you could care less how it works under the hood. If any of you don't tell me, they're like, I don't want to know how this works. But they really care a lot about whether their outcome is achieved as quickly as possible.
Yes.
If you're waiting for someone to perform a service for you and they're late and they want to give you a really long, complicated story about how there was traffic, or you're like, just like do the thing. Like I don't care. Like you don't want the details. And so think about the way cameras used to be marketed versus the iPhone, where it was like megapixels and like all the Japanese companies. Oh, there's a new camera with this and that.
Shutter speed.
Yeah. Or like the way Macs were marketed versus PCs.
Yes.
Specs. And so I just think it's different to sell a product to a solution-oriented customer versus someone that really needs to know or wants to know how it works. It's a different thing.
I like your vendor argument, which is like, I'm not going to say that tools don't make money. There are a lot of tools that make money. I will say, if you're in a market where most of the vendors are selling outcomes and you're selling tools, that's probably a recipe for disaster. The other thing that I will say is I think there are a lot of companies that founders think are selling tools and they're not. Right? The number of times I've talked to a YC founder and they'll say, well, AWS is tools, Stripe is tools. And it's like, it's so interesting. Unpack that. Because when AWS is selling you as a startup developer.
And this might be semantics, but here's what I would ask yourself. Do these companies have large sales teams? Are these salespeople compensated on size of contract? And do they have like commissions, and do they have like quota? Do their largest customers pay them tens of millions of dollars a year, if not more?
Yes.
And so all these companies would fit that bar.
Well, and if those salespeople are not talking to you, that probably means that your experience of that product is not a representative experience.
That is correct. Like signing up for Stripe for your self-service side project is different than being a very large and successful company that processes billions of dollars.
And it's trying to figure out, should we switch off of Chase Merchant Services and strip off Stripe with our $3 billion worth of volume? And I think that what gets people confused sometimes is that the brand of a story can often be built during the first couple of years when they might only be selling tools. And they might only be selling those tools to startups. And the number of people I talk to who are just like, well, obviously Stripe is just now more startups exist and more startups use them. And I'm like, that's lazy thinking.
I think this brings up a related topic. I know that some of the Sequoia folks put out like a bunch of content about selling outcomes versus selling software.
Yes.
And to quickly introduce my understanding of the argument, it's the following. The AI models make the value of code 0. Anyone can crank out code. And if you're trying to sell software, every time a smarter model comes out, the value of your code goes down.
Tools are getting cheaper and cheaper.
But if you're providing services, if you're selling outcomes, and you're using the AI tools internally to produce the outcome, every time the models get smarter, your margins get better.
Yes.
So you're like, oh yeah, we can deliver, what do you want a widget outcome? Yeah, we have widgets galore. And every time a smaller model comes out, it's cheaper for you to make widgets.
Yes.
You're pumped.
That's positive feedback.
I'm not sure that's the right framework for literally every startup. I think that's a stretch, but I think it's an interesting way to think about the difference between high value outcomes sales versus selling SaaS.
So I want to give you a challenge here. So I think this is a question that can scare people. As I'm moving from selling tools to selling outcomes, I'm imagining a world where I have thousands and thousands of customers. How can I understand each of their businesses well enough to be able to promise them that? That seems scary. How would you unpack that kind of question?
Well, I would start with how the comparables or competitors in your space think about this, and I would ask the customer, how do you evaluate outcome? This is like the classic quote a friend is someone asks, you just ask the customer. So I'd be like, cool, how are you guys evaluating outcomes, and what does success look like and what is not successful? And I would basically get your customers to educate you on this one.
Embedded in a lot of startup founders' minds is a volume of important customers that I wonder whether that's actually true. I'll pick on a company like Snowflake. How many customers pay Snowflake over $50 million? I don't know, but I don't think it's thousands. And so I think that basically, one, I think it's a simpler problem than it looks because not all customers are actually using Snowflake. And probably things that work for one company industry would work for another company industry. But I also think too, your biggest customers can get really big. Like, I've got a company that I funded, and they do logistics coordination for commerce. And it's like, you know what? You know how many Walmarts there are? Like, there just aren't that many. So, like, the reality is that most of their customers are going to be big, and there aren't that many. So I think that's another way that you can kind of unpack it, where it's like, you probably don't have to solve this problem for a customer. I think the second way that I would unpack it is, you might have more intel. Because you get to operate horizontally across a lot of your customers. You get to see how they're using your products to make money. You get to see other things that are making money. You might have a better view on what's going on than they do. What's funny is, like, you might not need to be an expert in their company. You might need to be an expert in how people are using your product to make money. And then you can communicate that to your other customers.
对，
Is
站
there
在
an
一起。
example of like an outcome-based company that you like to reference in Office Hours?
The Palantir is the obvious.
I think the problem with Palantir is it's so secretive that no one really knows. We shouldn't be friends.
Well, what's funny is, like, all you have to do is talk to people who work at Palantir about their individual products, like not what Palantir does. They're just like, tell me about one of your projects, and then immediately they're like, oh, like, this general used this to kill these people over here, and it worked really well. Oh, okay. Like, and so to me, they're an obvious clear example. I think the second one that I end up hearing about a lot is whenever you talk to salespeople for the hyperscalers. When the hyperscalers are selling other big companies, often non-software companies, it's a completely different conversation.
It's not like paper.
No. It's a completely, and it's all these like services they're going to provide, and like, oh, we do this thing, and we'll package our own thing here, we'll package our here, and like, we're going to develop what to you looks like a nice custom solution, but to us is just picking up pieces. I think Workday tried to do this, right? It's like, oh, what's your HR process? Our entire thing is flexible. It can change. It can grow. So to me, there are so many examples, and what's frustrating to me is it's too easy to copy the tactics that make people $10 million that never make them. And I think that's the thing. It's like the number of finance factor. It's like, well, this company made $10 million, and they raised a Series B. If I just do what they do, then we'll win.
Yeah, you know, I think my advice in Office Hours about this, if I'm just reflecting over the years, was I would always advise early stage companies to try to sell upmarket, because it usually wouldn't work. But if you try every few months constantly, every time you get a little bit closer to landing the big one. And so if I'm just reflecting on companies that I've worked with that ended up closing 7-figure contracts, it's not that they showed up one day and they just got it the first time they tried, it's that they kept trying to sell a 7-figure contract. They got a no, they understood why, and then they changed something about their product or process, and they tried again. It's usually it'll take like a year or two to get to that stage, but if they wouldn't have been hitting their head against the wall trying it a bunch of times, there's 0% chance of
Zero. Well, and you bring up another thing that I think generates so much fear. Dalton, you told me I have to grow 7% week over week. And now you're telling me it's going to take a year to figure out if I should close this deal? You're setting me up to fail. I should just sell startups to software.
Why are you trying to trick me?
Yes, I can sell software to
Have you guys never? Why didn't you tell me this was gonna be so hard? Look,
关掉，关掉。
there's a lot of effort that you have to put into things that may not work, but you learn.
打够，打够了。
It's kind of difficult. How do you both hit the growth goal and try to build and sell things that won't be successful the first time?
That's the game.
It's just the game.
And the way that I communicate to founders on this point is, in some ways, the sales cycle being slow is a gift, because you can operate a lot of these in parallel. Oh yeah, that person you talk to, they're going to take a few weeks vacation. I think that, like, what founders often get frustrated by is like the mental load of keeping a big customer in their head causes them to be afraid of talking to many of them.
Yep.
But the reality is the time is, that's, you know.